Hello, and welcome back to the Creative Life Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Qureshi, but you can call me Q. This episode is a conversation with author Laury Silvers. She's a retired academic and activist who took up fiction writing 6 years ago. Since then, she's published 4 books, a detective series set in 10th century Baghdad. Listen along as Laury and I discuss the process of changing careers at midlife, how to take legitimate criticism, and the importance of being open to accepting help and helping others as we live our creative lives. Hi, Laury. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you're an author. You're a published author, and I met you years ago online. We kind of have traveled in the same online circles for a very long time, and I met you when you were actually an academic. And so I've watched you transform yourself and your career I guess it's been, what, 5-6 years since you've taken up writing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, about 7. I mean, for when I started writing the books, maybe about
Yes.
7 or 8 years. Yeah.
Yes, as a fiction author, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, as
So
a fiction
yes, you
author,
were an
yeah.
academic. You did lots of writing there, as we
Yeah.
were talking about before
Yeah.
we started. But at some point, you decided, I'm done being an academic, and I'm going to write fiction books. And I want you to tell me the story of how that came about, because it's such a bold thing to do, especially with the amount of time and years that you had put into your academic career. So how did that come about?
I think the most important thing to understand about me as an academic was that I didn't want to be an academic. I fell into it. I was drawn into it. I was trying to be a high school English teacher. I also enjoyed writing fiction, but I had no sense if writing fiction was ever going to go anywhere. I had a few failed fiction writing courses, taken at junior colleges in the States. So I remember in The World According to Garp, he has this conversation with his wife where he says, well, I'm a writer. And she says proudly, I'm a reader. And I thought, well, maybe that's who I am. Maybe I'm a reader. I'm not a writer. And she was a university professor, but I thought, high school teaching is more where I'm at because I did very badly in high school. My undergraduate career was not distinguished in any way. I think I had a B average in my major. Nobody was calling on me to be some great scholar. I just wanted to make it through and have a good job. And I enjoyed being with other people. I'm a talkative person and I enjoy connecting with people despite being an introvert and having to go home and be very quiet afterwards. But I do really enjoy being with people. And so I thought, okay, this is a good job for me to have and would provide me with benefits, which in the United States is the thing that you have to have if you want to survive. So I was taking a study of another culture course to graduate and took a course on a medieval Muslim mystic. And unbeknownst to me in that course, I was doing very well as the graduate students who were sitting in on the course. And the professor, William Chittick, pulled me aside and said, I want you to be my graduate student.
Wow, you got recruited.
I got recruited into academia.
Oh, God.
I had no Arabic. I had no Persian. I had no French. I had no German. I had conversational Spanish. And this was it. This was all that I had going in. I'd never taken a course on history of religion before. I had nothing going in. I was just apparently really good at medieval Muslim metaphysics. So who knew that this is what I had?
What year was this? What year was this?
I think I was 24. I'm not sure, but I think I was 24. I'm very bad with ages and dates. So if anybody ever wants to check up on me, they'll find out that I'm probably wrong at any age or date that I'm going to claim. So I think I was 24. And I entered into that. I had to do all sorts of remedial work. I had to go away to study Arabic. I had to start learning about history of religion. I had to start learning how to think critically in a way that I had never known how to do. At the same time, I had married a man who was also entering into a graduate program within Islamic studies, and he got into Yale. And when we had to move to New Haven, I was able to sit in on the courses there, which opened up another whole level of textual analysis that I wasn't aware of. And there, Gerhard Bovering at Yale took me under his wing and gave me all sorts of wonderful advice. So I had this wonderful training with Professor Chittick, who gave me the kind of attention that I realize now, having met so many other graduate students, is entirely unusual.
I was just going to say, your
for anyone.
experience is an anomaly because it's usually just, you very rarely hear about people being nurtured in academia. So
Never. Yeah, never,
amazing.
rarely. I mean, I know several people who have been, but he truly nurtured me. He truly took me up from nothing and developed my mind. He really did. I also took classes with Sachiko Murata, but the majority of my courses were with Chittick, and the majority of my training was under him. I cannot even begin to explain to you the depth of knowledge that he shared with me and that he brought to life within me. I saw him recently, he and Dr. Murata, I saw recently. I went back to Long Island because, I mean, who knows when I would ever go there again, essentially to say goodbye and to say thank you.
Oh, that's
You know,
wonderful.
and just to let them know the extraordinary impact that they had on my life.
Wow.
And so I went back. I'm tearing up thinking about it. What they've done for me is beyond reckoning. And then we go to New Haven, and there Gerhard Bovering takes me under his wing, and he also shares all of his knowledge with me, and I get to sit in on these courses, and I have access to this extraordinary library. And it was Gerhard Bovering who gave me my dissertation project.
Wow.
And then between the two of them, between Bovering and Chittick, you know, and other people who I worked with, I was able to bring you know, a reasonable project to fruition. They were all very aware of my limitations as a scholar. And so I was not one of those people. I think sometimes when we think about academics, you think about those people whose language skills are so extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, they're people who are like, oh yes, and this word in the Ugaritic, whatever. They have this.
Yes, yes.
I did not have this capacity. Arabic was extremely difficult for me, far more difficult than others. I did not have all the big fancy words tripping off my tongue because I was high and drunk through the entirety of high school. So, you know, I just, you know, all those years when you're supposed to be picking up fancy words and ideas and things, and then the beginning of college, I just didn't have any of that. And went to junior college. I didn't have a lot. Many of my friends, when Chittick asked me to become his graduate student, actually told me that I should not accept the invitation and that I was not capable of it.
Oh my goodness.
Which is,
Now that's the academia I know.
yeah. So that was something. But I want to give them some small credit, and that they were aware of my limitations. They just didn't know that my limitations were doable within a particular kind of academic context. And so what Chittick said to me, he said, is, look, you're no good at any other one extra language at a time person. I was not capable of doing anything other than one extra language at a time. When I learned Persian, I forgot my Spanish. When I learned Arabic, I forgot my Persian. This was all I had. I could not do French and German. I couldn't do any of the rest. He said, you're going to stick to Arabic. We're going to stick to the early period in Sufism because there's no Persian to deal with. The only scholars who have written on that are German, but we can get somebody to, you know, to read something for you if you need it. You know, I had all this advice from all these people who were around me on how to manage the circumstances. And then I picked a very small, unstudied area. So I had very little outside work to do to master this one area that I was in. So
wow. And what was your dissertation?
My dissertation was on an early Muslim mystic who wrote one of the first Quran commentaries, one of the first Sufi Quran commentaries.
Wow.
And so, you know, it was Gerhard Bovering who got this for me and who gave me the manuscript to work from. And it was just extraordinary. So I had all these people with the most extraordinary generosity, carrying me through. When I first went to the American Academy of Religion and I gave my first paper, the established scholars actually held me in the room after I gave my paper and responded to me about the work that I had done and told me that I had taught them things that they were not aware of, that they had not thought of. And then they supported me. And I remember at another American Academy of Religion having given a paper and them holding me back. And afterwards, in an empty room, these established scholars sat there and hashed out the work with me. People just believed in me.
Wow.
And they guided me and they carried me through. And when I look back at my life and I look back at all the good things that have ever come to me from my life, I see all these people who have believed in me and who carried me through. And my fiction, my experience writing fiction is the same. Why I ended up leaving academia was because academia wasn't really my passion. And when I ended up quitting Skidmore College for many reasons I don't want to get into here, but I had met this wonderful Canadian man, and he has kids who are now my stepdaughters, and he wasn't moving to the States. I was very happy to quit my job and move to Canada. And there I started working part-time at the University of Toronto. And even though we're well paid in Canada, adjuncts, sessional professors are well paid, and we even get benefits and all the rest, it's nevertheless not an ideal job, which I did for years. And when the time came that budget cuts and other matters had come to a head, and it was time to go, then it was time to go and start the next phase of my life.
Wow. And can I ask what age you were approximately when that happened? Because I'm very interested, for personal reasons, about men but especially women who make those pivots in their middle age.
I'm going to have to look and see, because I don't actually remember. It's maybe 50 or 51. Yeah, maybe when I was 50 or 51, this is when that transition happened.
Were you terrified?
I
mean, we talked a little bit about, before we started recording, about the fact that you and I are similar in that we are terrified of many things, but then we are also the kind of people that jump off of cliffs. So talk to me about that.
I felt humiliated at losing my job.
Oh, I see.
Because I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
Professionally.
Yeah.
I always had something I could say. You go to a party, what do? I'm a professor. Even though I was a part-time professor, which doesn't mean a lot, you can say, I had something to say about who I was. I'm a stepmom, I'm a wife, I'm a professor. I know that sounds cheap and tawdry, like I shouldn't have been thinking about that, but it had become a part of my identity. I guess whatever career you undertake, when you decide to leave that career, something that's become so much a part of who you are, when you lose that, it's quite something. And I also wasn't entirely finished. So because even though I had done the work that I felt got out, the core of what I wanted to say about the period that I had been studying.
Yeah.
At the same time, I also was withdrawing from my activist circles. I was not quite finished doing the activism that I wanted to do, but I wasn't needed anymore. A new generation of people were coming in, and frankly, it was their turn. And it was time for me to step back, but I still felt like I had something to say. And I had always said to myself, as a cishet white person, that I would never say anything that somebody else was in a more appropriate space to say.
Yeah.
But if there was something that only I could say, then I would say. But otherwise, I would disappear into the back of the room or leave the room entirely. And so I knew there were things left to say for me, but I didn't know if those things were ever going to be said in public again. And so I had withdrawn from that. and I had no chance to say any of the academic things I wanted to do at this point. Also, it wasn't that I didn't have a chance. I could have written another academic paper and put it out. That could have been done, but I wasn't there for it anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't have the intentionality. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the sense of direction that I used to have. There's a weird kind of fury for me in writing academically, where I'm almost writing with a scalpel or a knife or a gun. There's a kind of a violence in the kind of academic writing I was doing that I felt I needed to unpack something, and that it was crucial that I unpack it. So again, this is Laury running headlong into fear with all these emotions and a sword coming out. And I tried to do all that work as ethically as I could. And I have an article I'm particularly proud of for disagreeing with a fellow scholar in an incredibly ethical way. It's one of the things that I'm most proud of in the way that I disagreed with this person. But it wasn't a feeling I wanted to feel anymore. And I didn't want to come at my activism through anger anymore. And I didn't want to reach into those feelings for my academic work anymore, if that makes sense.
It
So
makes total sense. And I
yeah,
just want to take a real quick pause. My goodness, Laury, this mirrors my experience, and especially over the last 2 years, so closely, where I was, I mean, obviously I was not an academic. I had 20 years as a marketing person, and I, had all my activism that was going. And at some point, I felt like I was just going through these motions and it wasn't doing it for me anymore. And also, I was just sort of I had changed. I was a different person, but I was still trying to be the same person and behave the same way and communicate the same way and do all these same things. And I too lost a job at the beginning of this year. I quit, but I was on my way out. I knew that they were going to fire me. And it was that same kind of, well, now what? And one thing that kind of struck me is I have all this feminist BS that I like to spew about, respecting women in all areas of life and whatever their choices. But I was mortified to have to go to parties and tell people I stay home.
yeah,
I don't have a job right now. You
yeah.
know, I kept falling back on what I did do. And it took me a little bit of time to sort of figure out where my next steps were going to be. But in that liminal space of not knowing, I was lost. I mean, I had no idea who I was. And it was a really weird, I mean, it was scary, but it was also just mostly just uncomfortable. Like I just felt wrong about everything until I figured out what I wanted to do next. Did you have that, or were you able to just seamlessly slide into what you were doing next?
I knew that I wanted to write fiction again,
Yeah.
because I had been wanting to do that. I have a short story I wrote, which is actually a really good short story that I wrote when I was 10. Right. So this has always been something I've wanted to do. So I knew I wanted to go back to do that. And my partner encouraged me to do it. He said, you do whatever you want to do. I'm going to encourage you, go ahead. And so I tried to write a novel. I wrote a novella, and I made the character somebody who in the past, the main character, somebody who in the past I would have raged against, because I needed to know that I could write a character I despised with empathy and compassion, and that
Wow.
I could be in the same room with that person, because that person was going to be in my head for a while.
Yeah.
And I did that. And I sent it to my friend, Michael Muhammad Knight. And I said to him, you get to say yes or no. You're going to get to tell me whether or not I can do this or not do this. And I trust you to tell me, Laury, go back to academic writing or write fiction. And he said, no, you've got work to do, but you can do this. So do it. And so I really needed somebody to tell me, you look fat in those jeans. And I have such a long relationship with him. I knew I could trust him to tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
And
he's known, for those who don't know, Dr. Knight, he is known for not hiding his opinions.
no, no, no. And and we have such a long relationship that he was a safe person for me.
Yeah.
to do that. So he did that. Also, my best friend, Kathleen, who will also happily tell me I look fat in those jeans and who I trust to tell me that, she also told me that she thought that I should go ahead. So, your husband's going to tell you to go ahead because he loves you and he wants to
Right.
stay married and,
Right.
he wants to have a good relationship with you. He's not going to say, he's not going to say anything. If he's smart, he's not going to say anything. Right. So, and then my next person was my mother, who would definitely tell me you look fat in those jeans. And she also told me to go ahead. So I had all the support that I needed. And one of the things that I've done throughout my experience of writing, and this is now I understand to be unusual. Most people don't do this, but for me, I'm constantly throwing drafts out at people or throwing a scene paragraph at people and saying, how does that make you feel? What do you like about that? Or does that, what are you imagining when I say that? So all my friends and everybody, all these people I don't know, happily just sort of sharing my work and getting feedback from everybody and thinking that through. So I really came at it feeling like I had the support of people who thought, you can do this work. This is going to be hard, but you can do this.
Yeah.
And so then I sort of thought about, okay, well, what do you want to write about? And my mother was the one who encouraged me to write a historical mystery set in the time and place of my research. And so she said, we've been reading mysteries our whole life together. All we ever do is talk about plotting, what we hate, what we don't hate, when we see the clue, when we, all of this. She said, you know how to do this. I'm here for you. Let's do this thing. And it was this wonderful experience I had with my mother, who died right when COVID lockdown began, that I had this experience with her of writing the first novel very, very closely with her, and the second novel a little less closely, because at that point she was starting her cognitive decline. But the first novel very, very closely with her. So it was this wonderful experience that I had with her going on. I would send her everything. Every day I wrote something, I would just send it to her in an email and she would read it and send me notes back. And then we would talk on the phone.
This is such an important lane that you're on here, because, as someone who is kind of making my way into the world of fiction, one of the things that I'm always worried about is being a pest. Like, I don't want to bother people to read my stuff or give me feedback, but I desperately need it. This seems to be a theme for you. And I'm wondering, what do you attribute to, or to what do you attribute the amount of just incredibly supportive and generous and, nurturing people that gravitate toward you? Because it really is that is a boon to any creative, is to have that kind of support community. Did you consciously go out and begin to construct that, or was it just people materialized when you needed them?
Okay, so I'm going to say this aloud, because if I don't say it, people will just think that I was taking from others.
Yeah.
But I tend to be a person who shows up for other people.
Nice.
And so because I'm a person who says, yeah, let me read it. When they have stuff to share, all my academic friends, I'm well known among my academic friends for being the intelligent but stupid reader. So somebody who works, my friend Kisha Ali, who works in Islamic law, will write this very, very detailed piece on something very arcane that I barely understand. And then she would send it to me and she would say, what am I even saying? And I would write back, I think you're doing this. Or she would say, can you read this for me and give me back notes? And I would say, oh yeah, here, but I lost track of what you were arguing there. And I'm sure it was perfectly explicable to a specialist, but she wanted a non-specialist to read it as well. And so I was able to give that kind of input. It's not just that. I try to show up for other people. So I'm only saying that aloud, and I don't mean to sound like, oh, I show up for other people. But I think if I don't say that, then people will just say, oh, look at this person who's always taking. So that aside, people have really shown up for me in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome.
In ways that I cannot explain other than just profound grace. I can share one story, an amazing story that, when I was 2 years old, my parents got divorced. My father wasn't a super engaged dad. Like we saw
Mhm.
him every Sunday for dinner for a couple of hours. My stepfather, ran off with another woman and stole all of our money. All these kinds of things that were about me not having a father figure in my life. And yet, all these other men were there to step in. And so one of these stories is my next door neighbor when I was quite young. I was in first grade. His wife had converted to some extremist Christian group and had taken off with the kids and left him. And so because he was Jewish, so he's home alone and missing his kids. And I didn't have a father around. And my mom was busy trying to figure out how to make things work for all of us. And I have 4 older sisters. It's not like she had nothing to do. And I had gone to school in first grade and found out that I was supposed to have a favorite animal. And I didn't know I was supposed to have a favorite animal. And I came home and my mom said, well, go to Frank next door. And so I went next door to Frank and he sat me on his lap and he had a big book that he had from his own kids of all the animals. And we slowly went through every page and we had very long conversations about
Wow.
which animal would be appropriate and which animal wouldn't be appropriate, until we finally picked a llama because I love the push me pull you, and L for Laury. And I've had people in my life all along, like Professor Chittick showing up out of nowhere and saying,
Yeah.
come and be my student. So yes, I do show up for other people. And so that encourages this back and forth. And that's, for me, is what being in relationship with other people is about
Right.
being there, this back and forth. But nothing can explain all those other ways in which people have shown up for me, for which I experience the most extraordinary gratitude. I can't explain it in any other way other than I'm amazed at the grace that I've been given
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of writers like to work alone. My friend Karen, who writes wonderful books set in the Depression era and in Tudor England, she likes to work alone, and she doesn't want anybody to read anything until she's ready to share it.
Mm.
So, this is just who I am as a person, is to gush and go back and forth. But,
Yeah.
that's
You
my
know,
style.
who was I talking to about this? I was having a recent conversation where I was talking about how people who are really passionate about their work want to see other people succeed in it. And they're very excited to share their knowledge. They're very excited to share, but they also don't want to waste their time. And
Yes.
the reality is that creative work is as hard or it takes as much effort as any other kind of work. So, if you are just kind of going at it half-assed and you're just sort of kind of trying to skate or just, work your contacts or whatever it is that people do,
Okay.
people are going to be less likely to want to
Right.
assist you, help
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But nobody can get there on their own. Everyone needs that kind of
Yeah.
network, that community. And whether it's a formal network or just sort of something that kind of comes about, it's necessary to succeed in any endeavor. And I would argue, especially in creativity. So I think part of it is that you are just you do the work, right? You're willing to do the work. You're not a slacker. And you're also just so enthusiastic about it, right? This is not, I mean, I think that carried you a long way in academia, where you were just, this professor saw in you this person who just got turned on by this subject and was like, I need that kind of energy. I need somebody who's that passionate to do this work. And of course, they're going to extend their hand to somebody like that. Basically, what I'm saying is it's really important, and I'm speaking to myself first and foremost, to interrogate yourself and say to yourself, what are my motivations for doing this? Am I writing just because I want to have my name on a book, or am I writing because it's my passion? Do I want to go into academia because I want, whatever, or is it something that I'm really interested in dedicating my life to? And when it is that second thing, when it comes from deep within you and it's just you're on fire for it, other people will absolutely step up and want to help you. It just happens. That's been my experience. And it's hard to keep that in mind, coming into a new way of being. I mean, I understood that in the past with my other activism and my marketing career, but it's really important to remember that as I go forward into a more creative lifestyle, is that those principles still apply. People are busy who are really good at what they do. They've dedicated their lives to it. And it's not that they want you to prove yourself. It's just that they don't want to waste time and energy.
Yes. I mean, and I think too, to be perfectly clear, people like hustle, people like people who show up, and people also too, they want to see return on their investment, of
Uh-huh.
their time investment.
Yep.
And sometimes this can come in the form of bartering with somebody, which is
Yep.
perfectly good. Sometimes you pay people. I barter on the books, the novels of mine in which I did not have the academic specialty, on Islamic court systems, and then on early Shiism, and then on the early Quran manuscripts. I either bartered or paid for scholarly attention to that, where I had these people, I could write them emails all the time. I could ask all the dumb questions. They checked the text, all of that. If these people who were doing really heavy intellectual attention to my writing, to make sure I got these historical narrative arcs correct, because they were beyond me. They were telling me, trust this literature, not that literature. Look at this page, not that page. So they were giving me a lot of input. So people are generous, but at the same time, they want to see some kind of return. My favorite experience working with someone, I started writing these novels, and I realized in the process of writing them that I needed my main characters to be half Nubian, half Arab.
Mm.
I realized that I needed to address anti-Black racism in the Muslim community, and in the way that we perceive our saints and our spiritual forebears, as we tend to see them as light-skinned because of the way that anti-Black racism works historically within Islam,
Wow.
and how prevalent it is in North American Muslim society. And
Yep.
that I had a responsibility to represent characters in a different way in that context. And so when I reached out to people, they were very eager for me to take my scholarship, which included analysis of communities, of some of these vulnerable communities, and bring that into fiction. And so Michael Mumisa at Cambridge, who actually works on people of African descent at the time period that I was studying, he said, I'm here for you. I'm just going to do this with you. We're going to make sure that this first
Wow.
novel is right, because this story needs to be there. And this turned out to be, for me, as we were talking about with activism, that I wasn't going to speak unless I had something particular to say. I actually was a specialist in these early Sufi women from vulnerable communities, and I had this very specialized knowledge. Nobody else had that knowledge but me at that time. Now other people do, but at that time, and I was going to do that. I mean, I'm sure there were graduate students who did, but at the time publishing, I
Yeah.
was, that was it. And so I thought, okay, well, this is something I can do, and I can bring that into fiction. So even if this is going on academically, nobody else is going to be able to bring the kind of historical accuracy that I can into fiction. And then Michael Mumisa steps in with his knowledge and make sure that everything I'm getting in the larger picture is correct.
Yeah.
And then Amina Wadud steps in and says, I'm going to read this and tell you where your white liberal writing is stepping off the mark.
She's awesome.
And so she steps in, and she tells you everything. She also tells you when you look fat in those jeans. And
Yes,
so,
she does.
and so she really helped me do all that. But these were people who really just wanted to give because they wanted that representation to be there. And
Yeah.
so their mode of giving wasn't giving to me, but was giving because they wanted to see that representation, and they wanted to see it done right. And then when I entered into the second novel, I had to, which is a thing a white writer is not supposed to do, I had to put an African descent enslaved girl at the center of the story. And there was no other way around it. And I did not know how I was going to be able to do that in an ethical way, but I just prayed over it. And I'm just like, I'm just going to work on this and work on this. And somehow this door is going to open. And there's a Black American Muslim writer by the name of Leila Abdullah Polos, who was on Facebook at one point when I was on, and she saw that I had a Black character, and she messaged me on Facebook to excoriate me for writing Black characters. And I said to her, well, do you want to read it first before like, I'm open to having been wrong, but do you want to read it first and tell me what you think? And so she said, you wait right there. And she went on to Amazon, Look Inside, and read the first couple of chapters with me waiting online while she read it. And then she came back and she said, okay, you did it. And then she was like, how can I help you?
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And so she helped me write that character. She helped me do that. And I said to her, how do I pay you back for this? And so she said, your job to pay me back for this is to do the same thing I did for you to do for other people.
Nice.
You need to read other people's drafts. You need to do that. And that was a natural push for me.
Yeah.
That was a natural push for me. And,
you spoke about this earlier before we started recording, where, you talked about how valuable your time in academia was because it allowed you to receive really sharp criticism without kind of falling apart or freaking out. And I think this is something that a lot of white creatives need to get that, built up. They need to build those calluses because there is now an expectation in the world that whatever creative work is done is going to have the correct representation, and that it's the responsibility of whoever is creating that stuff to do their due diligence. And I think that was a really great example of you being humble enough to seek out advice and the guidance from people who were in the best position to tell the story, and also not to overreact. When Layla comes at you online, I mean, a lot of people just kind of freak out and they shut down or they just whatever. But you were willing to make that into a conversation. And because of that, your work is better. You've built this great relationship with this other person, and you're able to continue, you've had a learning experience. You're able to continue to do this work and do it well, as opposed to, I've seen a million examples of where, somebody will get called out and rather than work with it, they just reject it, or, they call it, don't hate on me or whatever. So I really appreciate that about you. And I think it's an important point. I don't know. I hope the listening audience understands this. And I want to make it really clear that you are a white Muslim. You have been a practicing Muslim for decades now. And, you understand what it's like to be in a community of people who are basically minorities. You've navigated this community and you have those sensitivities. But even with that, even with your incredible knowledge and your connections within the Muslim community, you still were able to stay open to that kind of criticism. And I think that's wonderful.
So, I'm also, I don't want to make it out like this is some, this is some great big thing. You either want to have intimate relationships with people, which are grounded in trust, or you don't. Yeah. And if you have intimate relationships with people that are grounded in trust, then when they say to you, this thing you did is a problem, then you have to say, oh my God, yeah, okay, I'm going to take that and I'm going to digest that and I'm going to go away and think about that. And, and over life, we have to perfect that habit. This is sort of a joke in my family, I tend to just apologize no matter what anybody says to me, because 90% of the time I'm going to know that I was wrong on reflection. And so it's better just not to be defensive up front. And
it's like you were born to be a Canadian.
Truly. So, and then 10% of the time, actually there were mitigating circumstances that need to be discussed, or maybe I wasn't wrong and we have to have that conversation. But 90% of the time I was wrong. I always had something that I needed to understand. Yeah. Even if I was right, I still had something I needed to understand because what had happened didn't go well. Whatever it was didn't go well. There was always something to learn. So this is just a basic of having intimate, trusting relationships with people. And I understand that there are people who live in circumstances, social circumstances of privilege, where they don't have to actually have that kind of intimacy and trust with others because they can get away with it. So, in a patriarchal context, a man is not going to have to fully listen to his wife's concerns, right, because socially he doesn't need to carry on successfully.
Correct.
Whereas a person who is in a more vulnerable circumstance is going to have to actually learn how to navigate trust and intimacy in a different way if you're going to make things work. And white women certainly are in the circumstance where they don't have to listen if
Right.
they don't want to, because of that, because of those social grounds. So I had a whole bunch of experiences in my life that allowed me to do this kind of work. Again, just this grace of God throwing stuff at me over and over and over again that forced me to have to work on this, whether that be in therapy or whether that just be through the functionality of living and wanting to have close friendships with people and be a good friend. Or, through part of my Sufi path, this is at the center of the Sufi path, is self-reflection. And if you're not doing the self-reflection, then you're not doing the work. All of this is part of doing it. So it's not some kind of heroic thing. It's like, well, are you trying to be a human being or aren't you? And some of us are in these social circumstances where we aren't challenged to do that work. And I feel like in my life, the grace of my life has been that I have always been challenged to do that work. So it's not some kind of heroism on my part. It's just that, God was kind enough to me to throw me up against so many things throughout my life that forced me to make a choice to either have trusting, intimate relationships with people or not.
Yeah.
And then you just have to keep going. And so I do keep trying to do that. And the arc of my life is one in which I have made profound errors and either learned in that moment or learned years later and had to make recompense either immediately or recompense later. I've made some terrible, horrific mistakes in my life, especially in the beginning of my Islam when I was under the sway of various forms of theologies. And I thought God will only love me if I hate other people. And, I desperately wanted God to love me.
Yeah.
And, I became a person that I feel such extraordinary shame over in my life, and that I did things that are so shameful that, I can only pray the recompense that I've done since has in some way mitigated that. I've apologized to people and some people are not interested, and I get it. And yes, I get it. I never ask people to accept my apology. I only ever go to people and just say I was wrong, because I know sometimes there were things that I'd done in the past that were just wrong. And and we have to just leave those things there. So if you want to again, why do people show up? Is that, is that you have to show up. If you want to show up, you have to show up, and you have to expose yourself, and you have to be vulnerable. And I don't know why people are afraid of doing this. I understand that there are people who are afraid of looking at things because they're just lazy and they don't have to.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I get it. That is, as a novelist, I'm like, there's a character. I understand. I get that. I could write that character. I understand that, right? But then you don't want to be that character in real life. But if you want to have good relationships with people, you shouldn't be afraid. When you ask someone to pay attention to the way that they've harmed you, what do you want in return? And why the heck would you not be willing to give that to somebody else?
Right.
You want them to be vulnerable. You want them to look at themselves clearly. You want them to say, you are more important to me than this belief I have, than this ignorance that I have, than this power I have. You want them to say that to you. And so you need to be that person for others.
That's right.
In every part of life.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
this is a process. It's not like you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden you're aware of other people's social vulnerabilities or psychological vulnerabilities. This is a process, and you just have to keep showing up for it over and over and over again. And then you learn that the pain of accepting what people say is a gift of grace, is the pain of love.
Yeah. I mean, it goes right back to, what you were saying about being able to take criticism. Criticism isn't always bad. Even when somebody is angry and they're criticizing you, we just don't have the kind of, well, part of it may be that we don't have those kinds of connections with people where we can say, my relationship with you is more important than whatever it is, I'm willing to change to make it okay. But people who I admire, who have made great contributions in the world, whatever field they're in, this is almost universally part of their personality, and that is the ability to not freak out when somebody comes at them with criticism, or even, and I'm not even talking about harsh criticism. I mean, just like pushing back on you. But I've seen it happen over and over again where people will just be like, people are so mean, and I, my intentions were good and blah, blah, blah. But that's all fine. And that may be true, but it doesn't mean that that other person wasn't hurt by this or that they weren't offended by it. And that it's still your responsibility to clarify that. Because like you said, there was something, even if you're right about some things, something had gone wrong in the way that it was shared, communicated, or expressed that didn't work. And it's your responsibility as a professional communicator. Like if you're a writer, that's your job to be a good communicator. It's your responsibility to find out what that is so that you can course correct. And it really is that simple.
And I think it's okay for people to freak out. You just need to freak out in private. So
Good
like
point.
that's what your partner is for. You
Yeah.
go home and you say, and then your partner sits and looks at you and nods and goes, okay, so are you going to do the thing now? Or you say, okay, thanks for listening to me. I'm going to do the thing now.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
just say, oh, I'm terrible. Or, I mean, for me, if I freak out, I typically am like, that was really disturbing and upsetting and scary for me because they're saying something that's true. And now I have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my freaking out is like, I'm afraid what they've said is true.
Yeah.
And then I have to look at myself and I have to see the true thing to the degree that it is true, or the degree that I'm able to process that truth at that moment, because it's a process. It might take several years to get to the depth of that truth, but our responsibility to the person who brings the concern to us is to fall on our sword straight away and then go home and say, how is that true? And have all your out loud feelings at home in the privacy of your own home about how that's true, and then come back to that person and say, that's true and I was wrong, and I'm like, this is part of how I change as a person.
And how can I make it right?
Sometimes you can't make things right.
It's true. It's true.
Sometimes you can't make
But
things
it
right.
matters that you care enough to ask.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like
yeah. I mean,
I think sometimes that's just what people want to hear, is that you're willing to do what is necessary to fix it. Even if they aren't interested, it's still something that you can
I
say
think
that
I'm going to suggest that the scariest part of accepting criticism on any level is that you can't set it right. Because there's nothing better than being able to set things right, to set a problem to rest, and to say, well, I'm okay, I did a bad thing, but I set it right. There's nothing more profound and more exciting, should I say, than the moment where you realize you cannot set things right.
oh,
Because
tell me more about this.
this,
Why do you think that?
this, this is the moment where you truly transform as a human being. Because
Mm.
setting things right on some level can be a covering over of your own wrongs.
Mm.
So you can set things right in all kinds of mundane ways. Oh, you can set things right in your friendship, you're going to change, but then you're like, okay, I set it right. And so you get this feeling of comfort that keeps you from continuing to be able to see the depths at which you are still wrong.
Interesting. Yep.
And so when you can't set things right, it can do two things. It will drive you into a tailspin, or you can soar and you can say, I want to keep going. I want to know. I want to keep at this. I don't want to be a loser. And by loser, I don't mean loser like, oh, loser. I mean like the way the Quran talks about, they are among the losers.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to be among those who continually strive.
Yes.
What is the point of being alive if not this? And so it's terrifying, but our lives are lived at the edge of this terror.
Wow. It's so true. It's so true. And I think you're right. There is, and this is so funny because it goes all the way back to what we were talking about, which is we're the type of people that live in fear, but we like to jump off of cliffs. There is that exhilaration, right? That comes with fear. And once you get used to it, I mean, you never fully get used to it, but you kind of get into this mindset where each time a new thing comes along to confront you, you get that feeling like, okay, it's time for me to learn something here. I'm gonna, and it gives you the courage to kind of push forward and do that work. And like when I was younger, I mean, my goodness, my ego was so fragile and I was so terrified of being called out and being humiliated and all of these things. And now it's far less, but only after having gone through years of, getting smacked down by life and other wise people did I get to the point where I could tolerate it. And hopefully I'll continue to grow in that way. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I think you're right. I just have never looked at it that way. I've never looked at it as thrilling to be wrong, because that puts you on the cusp of learning something new, of growing and improving. Without that, without having hard lessons, right? However they're delivered, how are you going to continue to grow? And I like that you said that's what else is life for? What is it for? To be the same all the time, to never change?
There are tons of Sufi stories about this, that your life is going along really, really well, and then you get in some form or another some kind of terrible slap that shows you that it hasn't been going the way you thought.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you are presented with the opportunity to accept that slap with gratitude and to thank God for having not forgotten you. Because when everything's going along really, really smoothly and you think everything's fine, that means that God's forgotten you. And God said to this person, well, I guess you're comfortable with where you're at, so we're just going to leave you and move on to somebody who would prefer not to be comfortable, and to move on to somebody who would prefer to grow. And so carry on, enjoy your life as it is. I'm putting my attention elsewhere. And so, you want to, in the Sufi context, you never want to be a person whom God forgets to slap. You want to be a person who is open to getting slapped. I just always pray, God, make them gentle and make me able to feel that gentle slap so that I don't have to get, hit really, really hard by things, because we've all had those situations where, it took something, we were wrong, and then it took something massive to show us how wrong we were. And then the work that had to be done. So I'm always asking God to make these slaps gentle, but also to make it so that I see them right when they come. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's actually a Sufi prayer about this, of making sure that your awareness between the thing that you've done wrong, to make the receipt of the slap and the thing you've done wrong to be one right after the other, rather than to be something that comes within time. Like, you want to do the wrong thing and you want the slap straight away, because the longer it takes for you to recognize that slap, the worse it's getting. But this is the stuff of life, and And all of this is about, the kind of vulnerability it takes to write fiction, to
Right.
do good work, to be a friend, to be, to be an activist, to be out there in the world. What is it that you yourself can bring? And part of what you can bring is your willingness to show up for other people. So now this does not mean that some people don't come at you with all their stuff, right? I
Yeah,
mean, so
yeah, for
sometimes
sure.
people come at you with all their stuff. Some people are actually just abusers. Some people, like some people are coming at you with their stuff, and it's some privileged guy, who doesn't like it that you're not a fan of his toxic masculinity. It's like there's all these things that come in. So it's not like this is this simple matter. Somebody who just, who one of the responses I get about my novels is that one of the things that's very important for me in the novels is that I tell a very complex and not always comfortable story about the history of Islam,
Uh-huh.
because part of what I want to talk about is the diversity of experience in Islam. I want to talk about the difficult things in our history, not just the beautiful things. I'm not romantic in this way as a historian, and I'm not a romantic author in this way, is that I tell the story the way that we understand it to be, without covering over any of the parts. That said, I also try to tell it in a way that Muslim readers can still feel safe enough to reflect on that past and to think about how we understand the past for our present and understand their own choices. So that said, not everyone is going to be able to feel safe in that world that I've created, because not everyone is going to be willing to understand that, for instance, slavery in Islam is just as bad as every other kind of slavery, and there's no way to have a
Right.
conversation in which we say that it's not, despite its formations being distinctly different in some significant ways. And not everybody's going to be able to go there with me. Not everybody's going to be able to see some of those issues. And so sometimes people have come to me with those kind of complaints and saying that, that I shouldn't have written those books. I shouldn't be bringing that to the thing. And then there's nothing I can do about that complaint except for to say, these novels are not for you.
Mm.
And these novels are not for the people that you want to give a different picture to. You're not going to want to share these novels with those people. One of my first book readings was with a community of people in which one of the people who invited me, the religious leader of that community, actually excoriated me in front of the entire group for telling an unvarnished history of Islam. I mean, I feel like the story that I told of Islam is so beautiful and so hopeful, but not
Yeah.
everybody wants to say that or hear that. They don't want to think about how saintly women might have been raped. I'm sorry, but a woman walking through the countryside all by herself back in the day, I mean, that was just going to happen. I mean, that's going to happen now. This is the nature of the situation of being in this world. That this is something that's going to happen. And so, they want to think that, God would have protected her from a thing. And my attitude is, she's a greater saint for having been raped and having processed that rape and having processed that experience in a way that creates an example for those of us who have been raped,
Mm-hmm.
to see her as having found a way. There's an early Sufi woman who says, I fixed what was between God and me after something that I understand as a historian to have been a description of a rape.
Mm.
And and I include that in the novel.
Wow.
And she becomes a saint for us by saying, I fixed what's between God and me. Because I'm like, okay, how did you fix what was between God and you? And that's what I'm aspiring to. And so, but this person was not excited about that or about many other things, and pushed back on me. And all I could do was say, well, that was the story that I needed to tell. And my experience is that that's actually a really great story to tell. She was worried about how non-Muslims would receive it, that they're going to think terrible things about Islam. And I said to her, they already think terrible things about Islam.
Right.
And so, it's better for us to tell the truth about our weaknesses and our strengths, because then when we talk about our strengths, they believe us and that they know that. And many people in that room were nodding and saying that, these non-Muslims in the room were nodding and saying, that was my experience of reading your novel. Wow. So I felt like somebody was telling me the truth about Islam that made me understand Islam as a path of love and a path of diverse experience, but that it was not any of the things that I feared it was. And this person couldn't go there. They were still that person showing up in a room and clasping their hands and saying, Islam is peace. And it's like, and I get that, because as you know, as a person who's worked in interfaith circumstances, loads of people actually, that's all they want to know.
Yes, for sure.
They don't want that larger, more complex picture. Your neighbor just wants to know that you're not going to kill her.
Uh-huh.
They don't want the details. They're just like, I assure you, I'm not trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Everything's cool.
Right.
Everything's fine. Love, love, love. And they don't want more. So those people also have a role to play.
Indeed.
in that larger conversation. But that's not my role. So I have had pushback that I have not, this is part of that 10% that, but I've just had to say, my role is to do something different. And so this isn't for you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that you had that experience. And
I think that's fair.
Share your experience with other people. So if they don't want that, they know not to read it as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you've done your due diligence, right? And I think the thing, just to clarify, the thing that we're trying to avoid here is hurting people who are already hurt.
Yeah.
Right. But if you've done your due diligence, it's okay for other people to disagree with you and for you to just be like, that's okay. You don't have to like it. Yeah. And to feel perfectly vindicated. So before we close, I mean, this has been a great conversation, but I want to just switch tracks a little bit, because I don't want listeners to think that these are super like heavy academic books. They are rooted in academic knowledge, right? They are rigorously researched, and anyone who's been listening knows you've put the effort in. But when you read them, they're so full of life. They're so rich. And the narrative pulls you in. I was shocked, actually, when I read your book, because I actually expected, because I knew you were a professor, I was like, this is going to be a dry book. It was beautiful. Like you could immerse your senses in that time period and really visualize these characters, and just the idea of having like a true crime that takes place in the distant past is such a great vehicle for telling a story. How did you, I mean, I know you wrote when you were a kid and, you've always been sort of this person, but coming from academia, where it is just so dry, and then jumping into this new world of fiction, you really hit it out of the park right away. Right?
Thank
you were able to just immerse your reader. And to me, that's the hardest part about writing fiction, is you're actually helping people create a sensory experience as opposed to just conveying facts and information. How were you able to do that?
I'll say one thing about these novels, and one of the reasons why they haven't been read as widely as they might, is that there's actually a little too much history in them, which is why they end up in university courses, as course readings. So the average historical fiction reader is more used to history as texture, or a lighter sprinkling of a historical question. I took The Name of the Rose as my model for what to write. So this is partly like, how did I get there? I was looking at Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, and I thought, well, here is a fantastic, exciting mystery that has whole sections in Latin and is ultimately about semiotics, what are the meaning of language and symbols and words, and, and interpretive communities and all of this. And I thought, look at what he did. And I thought, oh, I want to do the same thing. And then too late, I found out that is one of the most despised books among historical mystery readers. So, I was like, oh no, what have I done? Right. So I don't have as wide a readership as I might have, because there's a lot of history in it. But how did I bring all that emotion to it? I am an extremely melodramatic person. I love melodrama. I love noir melodrama. I could watch Rebecca over and over and over again. I love all of that. Pedro Almodovar's films are among my favorite films. And All About Eve. I could watch it over and over. Now Voyager. All these movies for me are, how you tell an emotional story. So, when I was in therapy, my my therapist would say, that's really extreme language you're using about that thing, Laury. And I was like, what extreme? I'm just being myself. My therapist really couldn't get that I just had a melodramatic way of speaking, and that I wasn't actually describing the situation as melodramatically as it sounded. It sounded very melodramatic the way I was describing it, but in my mind, I was saying, well, I went to the store and I picked up a package. It's like, I went to the store and there was no packet, I was all over the place. So it wasn't difficult for me to bring that because I just enjoy it so much. What was difficult was learning as a writer, how do you describe somebody crossing a room? How do you describe somebody picking up a cup? How do you write a fight scene? My partner, who is actually a fighter, wrote all my fight scenes, and then I cut them down and made them work for me because I could not choreograph any of that for the life of me. How do you describe an emotion in someone and not over describe that emotion? I think that was difficult. I think I finally got it right by the fourth book, but I think there's a bit of over describing in the first book, but everybody loves it. This guy, I know, I'm going to not criticize myself in the Lover. By the time I get to the piece, the fourth book, I feel like, okay, I've really got it. But this one friend of mine who's a very well-established musician, I talked about my doubts once about the Lover, and writing this book that to me wasn't where I thought my writing should have been to start writing your first book. But because I'm like, forget it, I'm just sticking it out there anyway. And he said, that's your Love Me Do, and the piece is Hey Jude.
Oh, interesting.
And I said, okay, right, Love Me Do is this insanely wonderful but really simple song. Right? And Hey Jude is something else entirely. And yeah, I'm not the Beatles, and whatever with all of that. But again, if we can come back to process and vulnerability, is that you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable to write that song that maybe isn't going to be the song you want to look back at and say, well, that was the height of my vision, or that's really where I wanted to be. But the fact of the matter is that you had that experience reading The Lover, that despite all the history I crammed into it, you were nevertheless having this emotional experience. And I had this one reaction that to me is the reaction of all reactions to the story that I will always carry with me, because these four books are the arc of my two main characters, Tina and Zaytuna, and their recovery from trauma through the way that they are interacting in relationships of love with other people and with the Sufi community that they grew up in, and religion on the whole, and calling themselves to account. And so that arc takes place over the four books, where they do reach some kind of peace by the fourth book. But it's about trauma. And I was guest teaching in a class that was reading The Lover in their Intro to Islam course. And there was a student on the Zoom call that I recognized. And I recognized this student as being a survivor of a school shooting, who is now an activist, a gun control activist. And this person was in tears for the whole conversation. And this person came in and talked about what the book meant to them, to read an account of trauma that was so brutally honest, because Zaytuna is not a nice person. And we all know that there are very few good victims out there, and that when you're hurt, you hurt other people.
Yep.
You're not nice. You hurt the people that you love the most. you hurt yourself, you have all these things that you believe about yourself and other people, puts you in all of these terrible contexts that make the recovery of the traumatic incident even more difficult, because now you've wrecked all your relationships, and healing just becomes all that much more complicated going forward. And this person was emotionally wrecked in a really beautiful healing way through the book.
Wow.
And that was it. I got off the call and I was in tears, and I said to my husband, that's it, that's enough, I'm done. I've done, if the books don't hit anybody else, they've hit this person in this way. And I know Zaytuna's story mattered. So
Wow, that's intense. And I think that's why people who write not because they want their names on the covers, and not because they want to be in the New York Times bestsellers list and whatever. I mean, obviously those things are great, and it's always nice to be acknowledged and to, get acclaim or whatever. But ultimately, it's about touching other people and conveying things that are so hard to put into words. And I think that's why fiction is so important, because it allows us to have conversations. It allows us to tell stories in a way that bypass our analytical mind and speak directly to our hearts.
yeah.
And it's such a powerful way to write. And you're, I'm just in awe that you were able to do that successfully. And whether or not, however you define success, I consider publishing 4 books successful and 4 good books successful. And yes, they are being assigned in college, in university courses and whatever, but a lot of people are reading them just for pleasure, and they're absolutely worth reading for pleasure. So, congratulations on that, because I think I think you're doing what I want to do, which is writing full time and writing things that make a difference to people.
I think you can do that. I'm actually, I mean, not to sound as a cop out, my next series is just a mystery. One of my characters, Amar, is going to have his own detective agency, and and just he's going to find a body, things are going to work, he's going to invest. I'm shifting to just writing sort of regular mysteries on here on out. I feel like I said almost everything that I need to say, everything that I've been carrying intellectually and emotionally. I brought to those 4 novels, to the Sufi Mysteries Quartet. I brought to those books. And so now I'm actually finding I'm in this new stage where I'm transforming myself into this different kind of writer now going forward.
Interesting.
And how do I do that? I have an alternative historical world that I'm also writing books in, that I'm, when I have to ask those big ethical questions, I think I'm going to put those stories in that world and try to keep Amar's series a more straightforward kind of Anne Cleves Shetland kind of story, although with a private detective. Try to keep things on that kind of keel. But yeah, I just, I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful for this whole process, and for the belief that people have had in me, and the way people have shown up for me, the way readers have shown up for me. Just to have the ability to have the computer I want to work on, to have this office where I can see the birds at the feeder, all the things that have made it possible for me to have a husband who's willing to support me through this. I mean, we're not rich, but we're okay. There's food in the fridge, and that means that I can do this.
Right.
That means that I can do this. And so all those beautiful things that have been given to me that allow me to do this work, I just, alhamdulillah, I'm happy.
Yeah. I can
I'm really,
tell.
really grateful for it. Yeah, this part of my life is just terrific.
Wonderful. Well, Laury, thank you so much for sharing your time. I mean, I honestly, it's going to take me a while to process this entire conversation, because it's been so rich, and I'm kind of congratulating myself right now for having you on here. I was not expecting such a good conversation, but I should have known, having known you online for such a long time. In my show notes for the podcast, I'll go ahead and link to your stuff, your books, and your website and whatever. Is there anything else you think people should know about you before we sign off?
I'm a grandmother. I've recently become a grandmother.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I have this wonderful relationship with my stepdaughters. I'm really blessed with that, and I never thought I would have that experience with an infant in this way of that kind of close relationship. My stepdaughters were teens, and so when I came in, and so we got to be close at that stage in their lives. But I always look back at their videos of them as children with great longing and wishing I could have been there for that too. So to be here for my grandson's growth and all these little stages and all these words he's learning and just his happiness and when he falls asleep on me and when he's crying and all the things. I'm just I don't know, I don't know what, I say, in Sound of Music, I must, in my wicked childhood, I must have done something good.
Yeah, yeah.
That song?
Yeah, yeah.
That's how I feel. I must have done something good, alhamdulillah,
Yeah, yeah. That's
I'm just
wonderful.
I'm so grateful.
Awesome. All right, Laury, you keep on rocking, and I am looking forward to sharing this with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. This is a wonderful conversation. You really drew a lot out and you made it possible for me to speak with such openness. I really appreciate that.